Well, good morning, everyone. This is Margie Dean Graham, the host of Notes and Notables, and thank you for joining us today. And as always, we have a very special guest, Michele Peterson, who is the Director of Budgets here at Fort Lewis College, and she is one of our top people here at the college for many, many reasons. One, her history here, but also the fact is that she does oversee the budget for the college, which, as you can well imagine, is unbelievable. So we're going to learn a little bit about that later on in the interview. But what I want to do right now is let Michele tell us a little bit about her background before we get to sort of where she is today, because that's always the fun part. I learn so many things about our guests through this part of the interview. So welcome, Michele. I'm so glad that you're here today.
Thank you, Margie. I'm glad to be here.
So let me ask you, are you from this neck of the woods at all?
I am not. I'm originally a New York native. That's where I was born, although my family moved around quite a bit as we were growing up. I consider home Durango now, but really I lived in Michigan when I went to high school and college, and that's kind of where I kind of got rooted at that point. So I lived outside of Detroit, in the Detroit suburbs, and then I went to college at Michigan State University.
So how did you get from New York, and where in New York were you?
My parents were born and lived in Brooklyn, New York, and that's where they got married. And right after they got married, they started moving around the country. So in my whole life, I only lived in New York for about 8 years. But I was born there, and then my family started moving around right away. We lived in St. Louis, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and for a short stretch of about 7 years in the middle, when I was in grade school, we lived on Long Island in New York, in Syosset and Smithtown.
One of my roommates from college was from Syosset, as a matter of fact. So what did you think about all that moving around? You know, sometimes at a young age, it's a little tough because you're having to sort of reintroduce yourself, to people each time. So what did you think about it?
It is a little difficult, but it was part of who we were, and so you get used to it. I was glad when we kind of settled down in Michigan. We were there for about 7 years. That was probably the longest my family ever lived anywhere in one place when I was growing up. Since then, my parents have lived in Texas for about 25 years, so it would have been nice for them to have settled down before I got out of the house, but it was part of.
On the other hand, that you got sort of the bug for traveling probably. Did that sort of encourage you to travel around the country and maybe even over to Europe?
No, I actually have never been to Europe, and we actually didn't travel very much when I was growing up other than moving around. So that I haven't gotten the travel bug very much in my life.
Well, let me ask you, going back to the New York and Michigan connection. So you've two very different kinds of feelings of life, certainly. How did you decide on Michigan? I know you all were living there, but is it because your family was near?
My dad got transferred a lot, so that's how we ended up in Michigan. That was the latest transfer, and so during that 7 years, that's where he was working. And then when I was in college, he actually got laid off in the recession that hit in 1983. Oh gosh, I just gave away my age.
No, she's only 19, everybody. So,
and so then that's when they actually they moved to Cincinnati I was in my senior year of college, and then they moved to Texas a year later. I actually got married in Cincinnati because that's where they were living at the time that my husband and I got married. So
for school, so did you go to Michigan for undergraduate and graduate school?
Just undergraduate. Until now, I have not gone to graduate school. I'm currently in graduate school at CSU. But I picked Michigan State. When you live in the suburbs of Detroit, you really have two main options. I mean, the two that kind of stare you in the face every day: Michigan State and University of Michigan. And I always felt that Michigan State was a little more laid back than University of Michigan. I apologize to those from University of Michigan that I might offend by saying that. I'm more of a laid back person, and so the Michigan State campus was right for me.
Well, and you were smart to know sort of which way you wanted to go on that,
Right.
Let me ask you about your background. Obviously, you feel comfortable with numbers and equations and all of those kinds of things, or else you wouldn't be where you are. Did you have that comfortable feeling when you were young? I mean, when you were a kid, did you excel in math? And
I always did excel in math. When I was really young, I actually wanted to be a nurse. My mom was a nurse. And then one day I saw blood and I decided being a nurse was not for me. And then I gravitated towards accounting because I do like math. I always have liked math and been kind of see numbers in my head a little bit from time to time. So that I picked accounting at Michigan State. That was my major. And that's where I got my degree in.
So what were you thinking when you were there about your future? In other words, you picked accounting, which is very specific. It's not sort of business in general.
Right.
What was your goal?
I think my goal, like any other accounting student, would have been to go into public accounting. When you're in an accounting program, the one thing I've noticed is that they really train you to become a CPA. That's the focus of accounting programs, and and that was my goal. But I got married right out of college and started moving around. My husband moved around quite a bit in his career, just like my dad did.
So you're used to it.
And I was used to it. So the CPA thing never really worked out for me. I was always just, as we moved, following Dave and trying to find a job in any part of accounting. And I actually, through our moves, kind of zeroed in on nonprofit accounting. Luckily enough for me, every time we moved, there was a nonprofit that needed a controller type position. And so I think I worked at probably 3 or 4 nonprofits before I came to Fort Lewis College.
So what type of nonprofits were they?
I worked, some of them were pretty interesting, a developmental disabilities workshop, a parenting education program. That was probably the most interesting when we lived in San Antonio. This agency came to being to support women in the barrios of San Antonio and give them parenting education, and in the process also helps them get education. And then they employed the women that they had provided, many of the women that they had provided education to. So it was a tremendously successful program in San Antonio. Really good people. It was very much like a circle, yeah. And they're still in existence today. This was about 22 years ago that I worked there, and they're still in existence today. And they've actually grown throughout the whole state of Texas. They have chapters in about every major city and some of the smaller cities too.
The good thing about that is that they have expanded. The bad thing is that they have to expand because the need is there.
Absolutely.
Which is really, in a sense, a little upsetting, certainly. Well, you mentioned that you're now in graduate school for getting your, is it the CPA?
Going for an MBA.
Okay, going for an MBA. And so tell us a little bit about that. That's kind of exciting, and I think it's got to be difficult with your position here at the college to be able to balance this out, and as a mom and everything else.
It is, I'm finding it difficult. I was very Pollyanna-ish about it and didn't realize how bad it would be. And it's not really that bad yet. I anticipate it will become much worse. But, things have changed in my life in the last year. And I realized that I may not live the rest of my life in Durango. I might want to go somewhere else. And having the MBA is going to give me the credentials that I need to go into any job that I want. Steve Schwartz is our current vice president for finance and administration. And I have a lot of the same experiences that he does. I don't have the credentials. And so, I wanted to position myself that if he ever retired or moved on, that I would have the credentials to get his, be able to be considered for his job. Or I could go anywhere else in the state or anywhere else in the country in the same kind of position. I think the MBA will help me have that background.
Well, you're smart to think that far in advance because you're right. You need to be able to plan. Let me ask you a little bit more about the MBA side of it. Are you sort of specializing in business in general, or is there an emphasis within it?
There are emphasis emphases within it. I will probably go towards the finance emphasis, which really focuses on investments and market-related types of things. My other interest, especially from my position here, that I could go is with a computer science emphasis, where you learn about data mining and really understanding how to understand data and what kind of tools you can use to do that. So kind of have two trajectories I can go on, and I haven't had to decide yet. So I'll probably wait a year before I have to really figure it out.
I know this is going to sound crazy and you're going to shake your head like I'm nuts, but can you do both, or is it just too overwhelming?
No, I could do both. It's just a matter of how much do I want to pay for? You know?
That's absolutely.
It's just a cost factor.
Right.
Either one will get me the degree. Doing both gives me an extra probably semester and an extra tuition charge.
But it also gives you that.
It does.
You're that much more qualified, certainly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Doing. Well, let's go back a little bit as to when you first got to Fort Lewis. I mean, had you been to Durango before, first of all?
I had never been to Durango.
So how did you end up here?
Right. My husband actually worked for Sodexo. We lived in Pueblo before we moved here, so that was one of our stops. In fact, when we lived in San Antonio, he worked for Sodexo. It was a different company. It was called a different name back then. But we were in Pueblo because of Sodexo, and they had the manager opening here in Durango. And Dave had come over a few times to help out through some transition and had expressed interest in the job, and he was hired. And so we moved over here, and we were actually looking for houses on New Year's Eve weekend or New Year's weekend in 1999. Looking for houses on a holiday weekend is not a smart thing to do.
It's probably a little difficult, I would think.
Right. So that's why we came here. And of all the, as I said before, since we've been married, we moved around quite a bit for his position. And when we got here, I was lucky enough to secure an interview with the foundation. They happened to be looking for the financial manager position at the time. And that had been the first time. Dave had been on 3 other college campuses, and I'd never had that luck of being able to even get an interview on any of those campuses. So I was so ecstatic when I got the interview. And actually, it was a phone interview, and I was hired from the phone interview. Sherry Rochford hired me without even seeing me. I was so excited.
Very impressive. Very on your end.
Yeah. And I actually started working for the foundation on February 1st, 1999, which was the official start date for Kendall Blanchard as president.
So we might go into that a little bit later down the line. So if you're just tuning in, this is Margie Dean Gray with Notes and Notables, and my guest today is Michele Peterson, who's the Director of Budgets here at the college. And I thought this was a pretty apropos time to have her on board because they're looking into budget, for next year, and she's the key person involved with this. And we'll find out a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. But going back to, working with the foundation. So obviously at that time it was pretty doggone small, just a few of you that were involved with it. So that meant that you were having to wear, I'm sure, more than just one hat. And so was it even more preparation for you into coming into the job you're currently doing?
It was more preparation. One of the best things that happened to me when I worked for the foundation actually is because at the time the foundation shared space with the admissions office. And I actually had my cubicle right next to several admission counselors. I learned so much in that year about the college just listening to the admission counselors speak to prospective students. It was very exciting to be in that space and hear the energy generated from the admission counselors. I really credit that to how much was able to learn about the college early on. And with the foundation, you said wearing multiple hats. I prefer to do that. It keeps me, I don't like to having to do the same thing day after day, month after month. I was pretty involved in helping with some of the events that we did at the time, TLC for FLC and the Whalen Golf Tournament during those years. And that always kept things interesting. You weren't dealing with numbers all day. You weren't dealing with debits and credits.
So what did you learn from those kinds of events that would help you later down the line?
One of the things that I learned were the people that were involved. We have so many great supporters in the Durango community, and just knowing the names was so important. And even now, somebody will say a name, and I'll go, "Oh, I believe that they're a donor at the foundation, and they were in this and they did this, and I remember meeting them at TLC." And so being able to make those connections back to the players and the donors in the community, I think, is so important.
I may need to pick your brain on some of those, actually. You probably have some good stories about, some of them. Well, okay, so let me ask you, going back to the situation with being the financial manager, did that lead into something else? I want to sort of set the tone for the audience about sort of where you started and now as you're the director of budgets.
When I started, the position of financial manager was only a half-time position at the time, in February. And I was definitely interested in full-time work, and there was definitely enough work to make it a full-time position. And Sherry Rochford at the time went to the budget committee, interestingly enough, to request an increase in my position or funding for that to full-time. And in that process, Steve Schwartz was the budget director at the time, and he said, my budget analyst is going to be on medical leave during the month of June. If Michele would like, I could use some extra help in June, and we could get her full-time starting June 1st instead of July 1st. It's just a very opportune moment in my life, I think. These things happen, and how they come together, it's quite interesting. And so that's how I actually met Steve. And I worked for him half-time during the month of June and half-time for the foundation during that month. And then July 1st, I started as full-time financial manager. And then a few years later, Steve was getting promoted on an interim basis to vice president because Bob Dolphin, who was the then vice president, was in the process of retiring. And I saw him at a luncheon one day, and we kind of talked, and he said, if you're interested, you should come talk to me. And I did, and a few months later, he hired me as budget analyst. And a few months after that, I was interim budget director because he was interim vice president, and there was nobody left in the budget office except me and the other person we hired at the time that we hired me.
So how different was the job? And I'm sure it's very different, but from the foundation financial manager to now moving up and working in with Steve.
Right. The difference is as the financial manager for the foundation, you just really focus on the foundation. The ins and outs of one piece of what's happening at the college. You know it well, mind you, but it's just one piece. And as budget director, you get to see the whole thing. You know most of the stories of what's going on campus. You know a lot just from your relationships with people, not even because you're in the right meetings or, you hear things in the meetings. It's just from relationships. And so in my position now, I'm able to take an institutional view and say, okay, what does this look like for the college? The budget office is a really small piece of the whole college's budget. So I don't have to get into any fights about what does my budget look like, or I don't need to protect my turf. As some other, larger departments might need to. The budget office right now is just me and Janice Weeks, our budget analyst. So we're small. And so that allows me that opportunity to look at the bigger picture, which is important for my position.
Absolutely. I mean, you really do have to look broadly, more so than just, pinpointing things. Well, with the budget reviews coming up in the next couple of weeks, I think you all have actually already started maybe your meetings. But anyway, has your position changed from the time you first started off as director of budgets to where you are now?
The basic work in the position hasn't changed. Although, as I said before, I like to wear a lot of hats because if you just did budget work day in and day out, you'd get quite bored. In my 12 years as budget director, I've been lucky enough to be able to work on the Animas Hall construction project, the Student Union construction project, working on the design teams for both of those. I'm involved a little bit on the periphery of most of the construction projects. I know where the money is and where it's coming from, how much is available. So I pretty much know what's happening on that side of campus. So it keeps it interesting.
Mm-hmm. Michelle's being a little bit modest, I have to tell you, because she says she's worked on the periphery of some of these projects. As you all know, these are multi-million-dollar projects, and she has been overseeing them. I mean, she obviously has a team that she works with, but she has really been instrumental in making sure that these buildings happen, and they happen in the right way. So it's really, and I had the pleasure of and the honor of working with her for the Student Union building, and hopefully will for the GPE building. And I'd like to kind of go into the GPE. Hopefully by the end of this year, we'll be in a full campaign mode for, raising money for the GPE building. You've seen buildings on campus and how they've changed to the campus, and the students, but also the relationship with the community. How would you say that a new GPE building is going to help Fort Lewis?
Wow. All you have to do is sit in a meeting with Ryan Holland for 10 minutes and hear about things that the engineering department is doing. And it is so exciting. It just puts this new building in perspective. I haven't had the opportunity to do that with the geosciences faculty, so I don't want to leave them out. But listening to what engineering is doing, and they're growing at such a pace. This building, if nothing else, is so important for the engineering department. A few years ago, we didn't even really have our own engineering major. We educated engineering students for a few years, then shipped them out somewhere else. And now we have this major, and I don't even want to quote a number because I don't remember how many majors, but it's grown astronomically over the last few years, and I think it will continue to grow. And so this building is just going to be just a centerpiece of that program, and I believe it'll be a centerpiece of the geosciences building. The look on the biology faculty's faces and their demeanor changed so much when they moved into their new building, new space and space that's specially designed for what they're doing now and into the future is so important for the faculty.
Well, faculty morale obviously is very important, as is critically student morale.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the area where the GPU building will hopefully go is just so dilapidated. I mean, it hasn't been changed since the 60s, and I just can't even imagine what's behind those walls, to tell you the truth. I'm sure you all don't want to know what's behind those walls either. So this really is critical, for the lifeblood of these programs, as you said, and also what I think it's going to bring to the community, because it'll bring more students in, certainly, who will bring in more families and friends, and so everybody. So we become a catalyst for the community as well, down below. Obviously, we're going to be doing fundraising, and we're starting to get the collateral together to start talking to individuals about support, because we're hoping there'll be a number of naming opportunities for people.
Right.
And so let me ask you, as the financial guru here, can you suggest ways that people, where people can give their money that might be more important, or maybe not? Maybe it's just in general. Is there... I just want to be able to put it out there.
I think the important thing for the college right now is being able to build the building. And without the private support, we may not be able to build the building. That's what's so crucial. The building itself, I believe, and rough numbers, because I haven't studied them in a while, I believe the total cost of the building is $32 million, and we're looking for about $4.2 million in private support. Now, the numbers could have changed slightly in the last couple of years as construction prices go up or down and change. But without that $4 million, we can't really finish the building. We can't finish the inside of the building. So the community support is just crucial to the success of completing the building, and providing those spaces to faculty and students to be able to do their research and accomplish the things that they need to accomplish for the college.
So the state may be able to provide us enough funding to do the shell, in a sense, but if we don't have the private funding, we don't have the chairs or the rugs or the whatever
or
else
the
is
lab
needed,
tables,
yeah.
or
So
the
it really is.
mechanical system.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that would be a little difficult to have classes with nothing like that.
Right.
Well, I hope those of you who are listening, we've come to you many times in the past for financial support, and you've always come through in a pinch for us, and we're so appreciative of everything you do for the college. But we need you again. Michelle, because she's the one that has to look at the numbers. I worry about her because she probably it's like, oh my gosh, how are we going to get all these numbers taken care of? But you can help us with those numbers because you, in the long run, will benefit as much because it'll improve what's happening in the community by having new students come in and just having, as you said, a better morale, for that area. So it's really going to be important. And as a fundraiser myself, I have to put that plug in that, of course, this is a tax-deductible donation that you would be making to the college. And, of course, you need to work with your accountant on that. But also, it's part of the enterprise zone status.
That's exciting.
Yes, And we made sure that when we knew this was coming, I went to Region 9 to see if we could pull this in. And we have been able to do that. So, of course, that's another savings for our listeners who are landowners in Colorado. So that's, 25%. It's pretty
great.
doggone good. Yeah,
That
absolutely.
absolutely is, yes.
And if any of you have any questions, certainly where that's concerned, we're, even though we may not be officially starting the campaign, we're ready. We've got our hands open. If you're ready to give us some money, we're ready to take it, certainly, too. Anyway, so let's go on to budget because we're going to have to stop in a few minutes. And I know that budget is already in the works. That has got to be one of the most difficult things to deal with. So are you the one that sort of presents what's needed at the college because people come to you, or do they come and say, this is what we need? And then do you have to become the realist and saying,
Well, lucky for me, I have a budget committee that helps us all be realists.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much my role is coordinating the process. I take on doing all of the revenue estimates and telling the budget committee how much money we have to deal with, or how much money we have to spend, so to say. Really, the needs for the campus come from the campus. So they filter up through the vice presidents, and then the vice presidents prioritize in their areas. Excuse me, I'm sorry. We know that typically we'll get 2 or 3 times the number of requests as the money is available when we have money, on years that we have money. And so it's really important for the vice presidents to really look at the requests that are coming from their areas and say, this is really where we need to be going. And of course, the budget committee uses the strategic plan as its guidepost. And so everybody that requests funding, permanent funding, one-time funding, any kind of funding, really has to tie what their request is to how it helps the college achieve the strategic plan. And so the budget committee will get all those requests. They'll try to prioritize the best they can based on the money available and the strategic directions that the president has said she's most interested in during a year. And then kind of that negotiation takes place amongst the budget committee, and we come up with a nice end result at the end of the process.
So, obviously all the departments are out for themselves, which they need to be because they're their own advocates. So have you ever had a filibuster, where somebody comes in, whether it's a dean or a vice president, said, no, this is even more important because of this, this, and this, and it's finally like, okay, how do we balance this thing out?
We really haven't. Everybody on the budget committee works pretty well together. And I think one of the characteristics about most of the people in the budget committee is that they are able to take an institutional view. And the budget committee is made up of, the vice presidents and the deans, a couple of faculty reps, a student rep, a staff rep, and a classified staff rep. And, sometimes the deans do push their school needs more. But overall, everybody understands that it really has to be about the college as a whole, and the strategic plan. That's the key piece, is accomplishing the strategic plan.
So what would you say going into this budget programming, in a sense, what would you say is the biggest challenge financially for the college in this upcoming year?
You know, the thing that we worry about the most is what's going to happen to state funding. Not necessarily next year. Actually, next year we're going to see an increase of 11% in our state funding, but it's the years down the road. Unless the state economic situation gets fixed, and I mean by that Tabor and Gallagher and there's another one. I can't think of the name right now.
They're all bad.
But there they are. And it's really, in and of themselves, the individual bills are not, or, Constitution sections are not bad. It's the combination of all of them that creates stress in the economic situation. There was a study done by the University of Denver, and I don't have the exact name of their division that did it, that shows that by 2024, I think is now the year, the state won't have money for higher education. And so our budget committee kind of operates under that model that we're going to start losing state money at any point in time. And it's going to decrease, it's going to go away all at once. And so we're really trying to position ourselves to be prepared for that. So we're trying to make sure that we're not committing too much money in any one year, that if the state funding dropped out of the bottom next year, we'd have, by holding back some money, we kind of protect against having to do budget cuts in the future.
So like a little nest egg in
yes,
a sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's smart because, as you know, the state government, who knows, they're constantly changing one way or the other. And I'm sure you feel, responsible for these changes. And obviously you can't control how the state goes.
Right.
But people will be looking to you as the director of budgets to figure out how we're going to, make ends meet down the line.
Right.
So unfortunately, we're going to have to stop right now. And I'm sorry that we don't have more time because I've got a lot of other things I'd love to talk with you about. But I just want to tell you how much I admire you because you have done such a great job with the budget and handling. It's not easy to handle the needs for this college because there are many needs. And how do you balance it out? Which need is greater than the other? And you've always done it with a nice, calm, steady hand, and I really appreciate that. And I know that the next few weeks until you make final decisions, or actually, I guess the trustees make a final decision on the budget. It's not going to be an easy thing. You've got a lot of things ahead of you. So thank you for everything you are doing for the college and for the future of the college in particular. And thank you for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun having you on board.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun being here.